The Pacific Ocean crashed against the shores of Coronado Beach with the same relentless rhythm it had maintained for millions of years, indifferent to the human drama about to unfold on its sandy stage. At 0430 hours, under a sky still painted in shades of midnight blue, 23 candidates stood in perfect formation, their breath visible in the cool California morning air. Among them, standing exactly where she belonged despite what everyone else thought, was Petty Officer Sarah Chun. The whispers had started the moment she arrived at basic underwater demolition/SEAL training 3 weeks ago. They followed her through the chow hall, echoed in the barracks after lights out, and grew louder during the brief moments when instructors weren't within earshot. The other candidates didn't bother hiding their skepticism anymore. To them, she was an experiment that had gone on too long, a box-checking exercise that was somehow still breathing and taking up space that belonged to a real candidate. Shin kept her eyes forward, her jaw set in the same determined line that had carried her through Marine Corps boot camp, through 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and through the grueling pre-screening that had earned her a spot in this elite program. At 5 feet 6 inches and 135 pounds, she looked small among the wall of muscle that surrounded her. But looks, as she had learned long ago, could be devastatingly deceiving. "Listen up, tadpoles," Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. His reputation preceded him, a legend in the SEAL community with 4 deployments under his belt and a chest full of medals that told stories most people couldn't imagine. "Today we're running the obstacle course, and I want to see times that don't embarrass your mothers and the taxpayers who are funding this circus." The obstacle course at BUD/S was designed by people who understood that war didn't follow rules or offer second chances. 40 feet of rope climbing, cargo net traversals that tested every muscle fiber, and the dreaded dirty name, a series of log carries that had broken stronger candidates than anyone standing in formation this morning. The course record stood at 11 minutes and 47 seconds, set by a candidate who had gone on to become one of the most decorated SEALs in naval special warfare history. "Chun," Rodriguez's voice boomed across the beach. Front and center, Sarah stepped forward, her boots crunching against the sand with confidence that surprised even her. The senior chief studied her with eyes that had seen combat in places most people couldn't find on a map. Behind those weathered features was a mind constantly calculating, measuring, weighing the worth of every candidate who passed through his program. "Word is you think you belong here," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying just far enough for the other candidates to hear. "Word is you think you can do what these men do." "I don't think, Senior Chief," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the 22 pairs of eyes burning holes in her back. "I know." A few snickers rippled through the formation behind her. Rodriguez raised his hand, and the sound died instantly. In the SEAL community, respect wasn't given. It was earned through blood, sweat, and the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be taught in any classroom. "Confidence is good, Chun. Overconfidence will get you and your teammates killed," Rodriguez said. "You'll run the course first today. Alone. No pacing off anyone else, no waiting to see how it's done. Just you and the clock." Sarah nodded, accepting what everyone present understood was a test designed to make her fail publicly. In the cruel mathematics of BUD/S, instructors often used individual candidates as examples to motivate or demoralize the rest of the class. This morning, she was clearly intended to be the latter. She moved to the starting line, her mind already running through the course layout she had memorized during her first week. The obstacle course was as much mental as physical. Efficiency of movement mattered more than raw strength, and technique could overcome limitations that brute force couldn't address. "Time starts now." Sarah exploded forward, her legs pumping with the rhythm of someone who had spent years conditioning her body for exactly this moment. The first obstacle was a simple sprint to a rope wall, but the sand beneath her feet was deliberately kept soft and shifting, designed to steal energy from leg muscles that would need every ounce of strength for the challenges ahead. She hit the rope wall at full speed, her hands finding purchase on the thick manila rope with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours practicing this exact movement. Hand over hand, she scaled the 30-foot barrier, her breathing controlled despite the burning that was already starting to spread through her shoulders. At the top, she caught a glimpse of the candidates below. Some were watching with grudging interest, others with barely concealed hopes of witnessing a spectacular failure. But it was the expression on Senior Chief Rodriguez's face that surprised her. He wasn't watching like an instructor hoping to see a candidate break. He was watching like a warrior recognizing something familiar in another warrior. The descent was faster than the climb. Sarah using a controlled slide that would have terrified most people, but felt natural to someone who had rappelled from helicopters under enemy fire. She hit the ground running, already focused on the next challenge. The cargo nets came next, a maze of rope and steel designed to test upper body strength and problem-solving ability under physical stress. Most candidates attacked the nets with pure aggression, trying to power through obstacles that were designed to reward intelligence over intensity. Sarah had studied the nets for weeks, identifying the most efficient paths and hand positions that would conserve energy for the brutal challenges that followed. She moved through the cargo maze like water flowing around rocks, finding gaps and openings that others missed, using momentum and technique to overcome sections that stopped bigger candidates in their tracks. Her Marine Corps training had taught her that every movement should have a purpose, that wasted energy was the difference between success and failure in situations where failure meant death. Time. Rodriguez's voice called out as Sarah crossed the finish line, her chest heaving but her legs still steady beneath her. She turned to face the senior chief, who was looking at his stopwatch with an expression that revealed nothing. The other candidates had gathered closer, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by something that might have been respect if it weren't mixed with disbelief. 11 minutes, 52 seconds, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the beach with the weight of a verdict. The number hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. 5 seconds off the course record. Fast enough to beat every single candidate in the current class. Fast enough to rank in the top 10% of all times recorded in the past 5 years. Not bad for a diversity hire, came a voice from somewhere in the group of candidates. Rodriguez spun toward the formation with the speed of a man accustomed to violence, his eyes scanning faces until he found the source of the comment. Petty Officer Jake Morrison stood slightly apart from the others, his 6'4" frame and square jaw making him look like Central Casting's idea of a Navy SEAL. He had been one of the most vocal critics of Sarah's presence in the program, though he had been careful to keep his opinions just quiet enough to avoid official attention. Morrison, front and center, Rodriguez commanded. Morrison stepped forward with the swagger of someone who had never been seriously challenged in his life. His college football background and natural athleticism had carried him through most physical challenges without significant effort. He was exactly the type of candidate that recruiting posters featured, tall, muscular, and radiating the kind of confidence that looked good in photographs. "You have something to say about Chen's performance?" Rodriguez asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Just that it's interesting how standards seem to change depending on who's taking the test, Senior Chief," Morrison replied, his tone carefully respectful while his words dripped with implication. The beach fell silent except for the constant rhythm of waves breaking against the shore. Even the seagulls seemed to sense the tension that was building between the three figures standing apart from the group. "Is that right?" Rodriguez said slowly. "You think Chen got special treatment?" "I think we all saw what we saw, Senior Chief." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Morrison's perspective with the seriousness it deserved. Then, he smiled, and anyone who had served under him in combat would have recognized that particular expression as a warning sign. "Morrison, you'll run the course next. Right now? If you can beat Chen's time, I'll personally review her scores for any irregularities," Rodriguez said. "But if you can't beat the time set by this diversity hire, you'll spend the next week scrubbing toilets with a toothbrush and thinking about the difference between running your mouth and backing it up." Morrison's confident expression flickered for just a moment before returning to its previous arrogance. He was trapped by his own words and his own ego, forced into a challenge he couldn't back down from without losing face completely. "No problem, Senior Chief," Morrison said. "Happy to show how it's done." Sarah watched from the sideline as Morrison took his position at the starting line. She felt no satisfaction at his predicament, no pleasure at the trap he had built for himself. In her experience, true strength came from lifting others up, not tearing them down. But she also understood that respect in this environment was earned through performance, and Morrison was about to learn that lesson the hard way. "Time starts now." Morrison launched forward with the explosive power of his football background, attacking the course with the same brute force approach that had served him well in other physical challenges. He hit the rope wall like a linebacker, powering up hand over hand with impressive speed but wasteful technique. The cargo nets revealed the flaws in his strategy. Where Sarah had moved with precision and efficiency, Morrison tried to muscle through obstacles that were designed to punish exactly that approach. His larger frame became a liability in tight spaces, his focus on speed caused him to miss more efficient paths, and his early burst of energy began to fade as the course demanded sustained effort rather than explosive power. By the time he reached the final obstacles, Morrison's breathing was ragged and his movements had lost their earlier confidence. The log carries that required both strength and endurance exposed the difference between looking strong and being strong. His time, when Rodriguez finally called it out, was 13 minutes and 18 seconds, respectable for most candidates, but nowhere close to the standard Sarah had set. Morrison crossed the finish line and bent over, hands on his knees, struggling to catch his breath. When he finally straightened up, his face was flushed with more than just exertion. The realization of what had just happened was written clearly across his features. "Interesting," Rodriguez said, consulting his stopwatch again as if double-checking the numbers. "Seems like the diversity hire ran a minute and 26 seconds faster than the candidate who thinks standards are being lowered." The other candidates were no longer making eye contact with Morrison. In the brutal honesty of military training, performance spoke louder than personality, and Sarah's performance had just rewritten the conversation entirely. "Chun," Rodriguez called out, "fall in with your class. Morrison, report to the quarterdeck after evening chow. You and I are going to have a discussion about what diversity really means in this program." As the formation reorganized for the next phase of training, Sarah noticed the shift in how the other candidates positioned themselves around her. The deliberate distance that had characterized the past 3 weeks was still there, but it was different now. Instead of the isolation of rejection, it had become the space that warriors give to other warriors, not out of hostility, but out of respect. The morning's events had changed something fundamental in the group dynamics. Sarah knew that one good performance wouldn't erase weeks of skepticism, and she was far from proving herself worthy of the trident that every candidate dreamed of earning. But she had taken the first real step toward acceptance, and in a program where most people failed, any step forward was a victory worth celebrating. As they moved toward the next training evolution, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window of a nearby building. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had arrived at BUD/S 3 weeks ago. The doubt that had lingered in her eyes despite her outward confidence was gone, replaced by the quiet certainty of someone who had just proven something important to herself. The whispers would continue, she knew. The challenges would get harder, not easier. But for the first time since arriving at Coronado, Sarah Chin felt like she belonged exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The Pacific Ocean continued its eternal rhythm against the shore, indifferent to human drama, but somehow approving of the small victory that had just played out on its sandy stage. In the great tradition of warriors who had trained on these same beaches, another candidate had just discovered what they were truly capable of achieving. And this was only the beginning. The Hell Week preparation began at 0300 hours on a Tuesday that would become legendary in BUD/S folklore, though none of the candidates knew it at the time. Sarah Chin stood in formation with 19 other candidates, for had already rung the bell and quit since the obstacle course incident 2 weeks earlier. The brass bell mounted on a wooden post had become a symbol of surrender that haunted every candidate's dreams, its metallic song offering an end to pain that grew more tempting with each passing day. Senior Chief Rodriguez paced in front of the formation like a predator sizing up prey, his weathered face revealing nothing about the torment he was planning to unleash. Behind him, 6 additional instructors had materialized from the shadows, each carrying the kind of equipment that promised suffering on a scale these candidates had never experienced. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez began, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness, "and, Chun, today we begin the final phase of preparation before Hell Week. Some of you think you know what pain is. Some of you think you understand what it means to push beyond your limits. You're all wrong." Sarah kept her eyes focused straight ahead, but she could sense the nervous energy radiating from the candidates around her. Morrison, who had kept a respectful distance since his humiliation on the obstacle course, was breathing in controlled bursts that betrayed his anxiety. To her left, Petty Officer David Kim, a quiet, methodical candidate who had consistently performed in the top 5% of all evolutions, stood with the stillness of someone who had learned to conserve energy for the battles that mattered. "The human body," Rodriguez continued, "is capable of approximately 20 times more than what your mind believes possible. The difference between candidates who earn the trident and those who ring the bell isn't physical, it's mental. Today we're going to explore exactly where each of your mental limits actually lie." The first evolution was deceptively simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Each candidate would carry a 200-pound log over a 2-mile course that included sand, surf, rocky terrain, and obstacles specifically designed to test both individual strength and team coordination. The twist that separated this from normal log PT was that candidates would be rotating through the exercise individually, carrying their log alone while the rest of the class followed behind, watching and waiting for their turn. The psychological component is just as important as the physical. Instructor Petty Officer First Class Angela Torres explained as she supervised the preparation. Torres was a legend in her own right, one of the first women to complete the Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman course, and a veteran of multiple classified operations. Her presence at BUD/S was both rare and significant, a clear signal that this evolution was being watched at the highest levels of the naval special warfare community. Sarah was selected to go first, a choice that surprised no one given the pattern that had emerged since her record-breaking obstacle course performance. She approached the log, a telephone pole-sized piece of timber that had been worn smooth by countless candidates, and studied the best approach for getting it onto her shoulders without assistance. 2 minutes to get moving, Chun, Torres announced. Timer starts now. The physics of lifting 200 pounds of dead weight without help required technique that went far beyond brute strength. Sarah had spent hours visualizing this moment, breaking down the movement into components that would allow her 135-pound frame to succeed where larger candidates often failed. She squatted low, wrapped her arms around the log's center point, and used her legs and core to roll the weight onto her shoulder in one fluid motion. The first 100 yards across soft sand felt manageable, almost easy compared to some of the challenges she had already overcome. The log's weight distributed evenly across her shoulder and upper back. Her breathing remained controlled, and her pace stayed consistent with what she had planned during countless mental rehearsals. But logs, like the enemies that Special Operations Forces faced in real combat, had a way of becoming heavier and more unwieldy as time progressed. By the quarter-mile mark, Sarah's shoulder was burning with a pain that radiated down her arm and across her back. The sand beneath her feet seemed to grow softer with each step, stealing energy from leg muscles that would need every ounce of strength for the mile and 3/4 that remained. Behind her, the other candidates followed in single file, some offering quiet encouragement, others silently calculating whether they could match her performance when their turn came. Morrison jogged near the back of the group, his expression unreadable, but his attention focused entirely on Sarah's technique and pacing. The first major obstacle came at the half-mile mark, a series of concrete barriers that required candidates to climb over while maintaining control of their log. Sarah approached the barriers methodically, shifting the log's position to maintain balance as she navigated the climb. The concrete was unforgiving against her knees and shins, but she had learned to embrace pain as information rather than suffering as an enemy. Time check. Torres called out from her position on an ATV that paralleled the course. 14 minutes, 30 seconds at the half-mile mark. The number meant Sarah was slightly ahead of the pace needed to complete the evolution within the allotted time, but she knew the second half of the course would be significantly more challenging than the first. The route ahead included a stretch of rocky shoreline where footing would be treacherous, a quarter-mile of soft sand that would test her leg strength to its limits, and a final series of obstacles that required both strength and problem-solving ability. As she crested a small hill and caught her first glimpse of the rocky shoreline ahead, Sarah felt the first whisper of doubt creep into her mind. The rocks were larger and more jagged than they had appeared in the briefings, and the surf was running higher than normal, sending spray across the entire area she would need to traverse. She pushed the doubt aside and focused on her breathing, using a technique she had learned during her Marine Corps training to maintain mental clarity under physical stress. Each inhale brought oxygen to muscles that were beginning to scream for relief. Each exhale carried away the mental noise that could derail her focus when she needed it most. The rocky shoreline proved to be every bit as challenging as it had appeared from a distance. Each step required careful placement to avoid slipping on surfaces made treacherous by seawater and algae. The log's weight, which had felt manageable on sand, became a liability that threatened to throw her off balance with every movement. Halfway across the rocks, disaster struck. Sarah's left foot slipped on a patch of wet stone, sending her stumbling sideways toward a gap between two large boulders. The log's momentum carried her beyond her center of balance, and, for a terrifying moment, she felt herself falling toward rocks that could easily cause serious injury. Time slowed in the way it often did during moments of crisis. Sarah's mind processed multiple options in the space of a heartbeat: drop the log and save herself from injury, try to regain her balance and risk a more serious fall, or find a third option that her training hadn't specifically prepared her for. She chose the third option. Instead of fighting the fall, Sarah used the log's momentum to her advantage, allowing it to swing in a controlled arc that she redirected toward the gap between rocks. She followed the log's path, landing hard but safely in the sandy space between boulders, the log coming to rest exactly where she had intended. The candidates following behind had stopped moving, watching in stunned silence as Sarah extracted herself from the gap and repositioned the log on her shoulder. What could have been an evolution-ending disaster had become a demonstration of the kind of split-second decision-making that defines successful special operations personnel. Improvise, adapt, overcome. Torres called out with obvious approval. Outstanding recovery, Chun. Keep moving. The final quarter mile of the course included a stretch of sand so soft it felt like running through quicksand, followed by a series of obstacles that tested every muscle group that hadn't already been pushed to its limit. Sarah's breathing was no longer controlled. Each inhalation was a conscious effort, each step forward an act of will rather than automatic movement. With 100 yards remaining, her legs began to shake with fatigue that threatened to drop her where she stood. The log felt like it had doubled in weight, and her shoulder had progressed from burning to complete numbness. Around her, she could hear the voices of her fellow candidates offering encouragement, but their words seemed to come from a great distance. 50 yards from the finish line, Sarah's body began to shut down. Her vision narrowed, her hearing became muffled, and her legs moved only because her mind refused to let them stop. She had entered the zone that separated those who earned the trident from those who didn't, the place where the body screamed for surrender, but the mind demanded victory. 20 yards, 10 yards, 5. Sarah crossed the finish line and immediately collapsed to her knees, the log rolling off her shoulder and coming to rest in the sand beside her. She had completed the evolution in 37 minutes and 15 seconds, establishing a new record for individual log carry that would stand for the next 3 years. But more importantly than the record was what happened next. As Sarah knelt in the sand, struggling to catch her breath and process what she had just accomplished, the other candidates gathered around her. Without speaking, they formed a circle of protection while she recovered, a gesture of respect that spoke louder than any words could have conveyed. Morrison was the first to offer his hand to help her to her feet. When she looked up at him, she saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before, recognition of a fellow warrior rather than resentment toward an outsider. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "The way you recovered from that slip on the rocks, that wasn't luck. That was pure skill." Sarah accepted his help standing up, noting how her legs still shook with residual fatigue, but held her weight without complaint. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your turn to show us how it's done." Over the next 4 hours, she watched as each of her fellow candidates faced the same challenge she had just completed. Some succeeded, some failed, and some discovered reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. But every candidate who followed her path across those rocks paused at the spot where she had nearly fallen, studying the gap between boulders and the way she had turned a potential disaster into a moment of triumph. Kim completed his run in 39 minutes, using a different technique, but matching Sarah's determination. Morrison finished in 41 minutes, his raw power compensating for less efficient form. 3 candidates failed to complete the evolution within the allotted time and were removed from training, their dreams of earning the trident ending in the soft sand of Coronado Beach. As the day progressed through additional evolutions that tested swimming endurance, marksmanship under fatigue, and problem-solving ability under stress, Sarah noticed a fundamental shift in the group dynamics. The invisible walls that had separated her from her fellow candidates were dissolving, replaced by the bonds that formed between people who had shared extreme challenges and emerged stronger. During the evening meal, she found herself sitting at a table surrounded by candidates who had previously eaten elsewhere. The conversation wasn't forced or artificial. It was the natural camaraderie that developed among warriors who had tested each other's limits and found them acceptable. "Question for you, Chan," said Petty Officer Luis Ramirez, a soft-spoken candidate whose quiet competence had earned him respect from instructors and fellow candidates alike. "That move you made on the rocks today, was that something you trained for, or did you just make it up on the spot?" Sarah considered the question while she finished chewing a bite of the tasteless protein that passed for dinner in military dining facilities. Little of both, she said finally. Marine Corps taught me to always be looking for the third option when the first two are both bad. But the specific technique, that was pure improvisation. Improvisation based on years of training and experience. Torres interjected from the instructor's table nearby. Don't sell yourself short, Chun. What you did today was the definition of what we're trying to develop in every candidate who passes through this program. The compliment from Torres carried special weight, not just because of her rank, but because of her reputation for honesty that bordered on brutality. If Angela Torres said you had performed well, it was because you had earned it through blood, sweat, and the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be faked. Later that evening, as Sarah cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next day's training, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed since arriving at BUD/S 6 weeks earlier. The whispers hadn't completely stopped, but their tone had shifted from skepticism to curiosity about what she might accomplish next. More importantly, she had begun to see herself differently. The woman who had first walked onto Coronado Beach had been competent and determined, but she had also been carrying doubts about whether she truly belonged among the elite warriors she hoped to join. Today's performance had answered that question definitively. She belonged here not because of any special consideration or lowered standards, but because she had earned her place through the same brutal testing that every SEAL candidate faced. The log carry had been more than just a physical challenge. It had been a declaration that she was ready for whatever came next. And what came next, she knew, would make everything she had experienced so far seem like preparation for the real test. Hell Week was only days away, and Hell Week separated the warriors from everyone else who just thought they wanted to be warriors. As she settled into her bunk for another night of too little sleep and dreams filled with the sound of brass bells ringing, Sarah Chin smiled for the first time since arriving at BUD/S. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new chances to silence the doubts that still lingered in some corners of the program. But tonight, she would rest with the knowledge that she had crossed a threshold that many strong people never reached. She had discovered exactly what she was capable of when everything was on the line, and the answer had surprised even her. The Pacific Ocean outside her barracks window continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to human struggle, but somehow approving of another warrior who had just taken a significant step toward joining the ranks of the elite. Hell Week began with the sound of machine gun fire at precisely 2,347 hours on a Sunday night that would be remembered by every candidate who survived it. Sarah Chun had been lying in her bunk, not sleeping but conserving energy through controlled breathing techniques, when the barracks exploded into chaos that felt more real than any training scenario had a right to feel. Blank ammunition filled the air with smoke and noise while instructors wearing camouflage face paint burst through doors, screaming orders, and creating the kind of confusion that separated people who could think under pressure from those who simply reacted to it. Emergency sirens wailed across the compound as simulated artillery shells, actually large firecrackers, detonated in sequence around the buildings. Get out! Get out! Get out! Senior Chief Rodriguez's voice boomed over the artificial chaos, amplified by a bullhorn that made every word sound like a battlefield command. You have 30 seconds to muster in the grinder in full gear, or you're all heading home. Sarah rolled out of her bunk with movements that had been practiced until they became automatic, her body responding to the emergency while her mind remained calm and focused. Around her, other candidates struggled with equipment and fought against the adrenaline that made simple tasks suddenly complicated. She had anticipated this moment for weeks, visualizing the start of Hell Week in detail and planning her response to various scenarios. Her gear was organized exactly where she could find it in darkness. Her uniform was laid out for maximum speed and dressing, and her mental preparation had included techniques for maintaining clarity when chaos was designed to create confusion. 28 seconds later, she stood in formation in the grinder, the concrete courtyard that had become as familiar as her own bedroom over the past 7 weeks. 15 other candidates had made the deadline, 4 had not, and those 4 were already being processed out of the program, their Hell Week ending before it truly began. The eliminations served a purpose beyond simple time management. Hell Week was designed to simulate 5.5 days of continuous combat operations, and combat didn't wait for people who couldn't respond immediately to changing circumstances. The candidates who couldn't muster in 30 seconds were the same ones who would get their teammates killed in real operations. "Welcome to Hell Week," Rodriguez announced, his voice now eerily calm in contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. "For the next 132 hours, you will get approximately 4 hours of sleep total. You will be cold, wet, sandy, and pushed beyond anything you thought possible. You will discover muscles you didn't know you had, and you will learn exactly what your mind is capable of when your body wants to quit." Sarah scanned the formation around her, noting which candidates appeared composed and which were already showing signs of stress that would only get worse as the week progressed. Morrison stood to her right, his jaw set in determination, but his hands trembling slightly with residual adrenaline. Kim had achieved the same outward calm that had characterized his performance throughout training, but she noticed his breathing was slightly elevated. "Boat cruise," Rodriguez continued, and Sarah felt her stomach tighten with anticipation. The boat crew assignments would determine who she would depend on, and who would depend on her for the next 5 days. In BUD/S mythology, boat crews were more than tactical units. They were families forged by shared suffering and mutual reliance. Chun, Morrison, Kim, Ramirez, Thompson, Williams, boat crew 2. The assignment paired her with Morrison, which could have been problematic given their history, but also with Kim and Ramirez, whose competence she respected. Thompson and Williams were unknowns, steady performers who hadn't distinguished themselves positively or negatively during the previous weeks of training. The first evolution began immediately. Each boat crew would carry their IBS, inflatable boat, small, over their heads for a 2-mile trek across Coronado, into the ocean for a navigation exercise, and back to the beach for the next challenge. The boats weighed approximately 180 pounds when dry, but they would be anything but dry for the next 5 days. "Boat crew leaders, step forward," Rodriguez commanded. Sarah was surprised when Morrison immediately took a step ahead of their group. His leadership style had been questioned during previous exercises, but Hell Week wasn't the time for democracy or lengthy discussions about decision-making authority. "You're boat crew leader until you quit, get injured, or I decide you're not capable of the job," Rodriguez told Morrison directly. "Your crew succeeds or fails based on your decisions. Their pain is your responsibility, and their success is your achievement." The boat carry began in darkness and continued into dawn, 6 candidates moving as a single unit with 180 pounds of rubber and metal balanced over their heads. The rhythm was critical, synchronized steps that distributed weight evenly and prevented the boat from shifting in ways that could cause injury or slow their progress. Sarah found herself positioned at the front left corner of the boat, a spot that required constant communication with Morrison at the front right and careful coordination with the movements of the crew behind her. The physical challenge was significant, but the mental component was even more demanding as 6 different personalities had to function as a single organism under stress. "Left turn in 50 meters," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the authority that came with accepting full responsibility for their collective performance. "Chun, call out any obstacles on your side." The navigation through Coronado's streets in pre-dawn darkness required trust between crew members who were still learning to work together under extreme conditions. Sarah found herself developing a new appreciation for Morrison's leadership as he made quick decisions that kept them moving efficiently while maintaining crew cohesion. By the time they reached the surf, the boat had collected condensation and salt spray that made it heavier and more difficult to control. The ocean entry, a complex maneuver that required perfect timing to avoid capsizing in the waves, would test everything they had learned about working together under pressure. "Listen up," Morrison said as they paused at the water's edge. "We're going in fast and straight. Chun and I control direction. Everyone else provides power. If someone goes down, the whole crew stops to help. No one gets left behind." The principle of leaving no one behind wasn't just BUD/S philosophy. It was the foundation of every special operations unit in the world. The candidates who couldn't internalize that concept would never earn the trident, regardless of their individual capabilities. The surf entry went flawlessly, 6 people moving with the precision of a drill team despite the chaos of breaking waves and shifting sand beneath their feet. Once in deeper water, they faced a navigation course that would take them around Coronado Island and back to their starting point, a distance of approximately 6 miles in conditions that included strong currents and water temperature that hovered around 58 degrees. 3 hours later, they returned to the beach exhausted but intact, having completed the navigation course within the designated time parameters. But there was no time for rest or celebration. Hell Week was designed as a continuous operation where one evolution flowed seamlessly into the next without pause for recovery. The log PT that followed the boat exercise introduced a new level of suffering that transformed previous challenges into fond memories. 200-pound telephone poles became extensions of their bodies as they performed exercises that combined strength training with cardiovascular torture. Overhead presses with logs that required 6 people to lift safely, races across soft sand while carrying logs at waist level, and synchronized movements that demanded perfect coordination despite mounting fatigue. By noon of the first day, 3 more candidates had quit. The brass bell that had haunted their dreams for weeks had become a reality for Lopez, who simply couldn't maintain the pace required for boat crew operations. Anderson lasted until the 3rd hour of log PT before deciding that no amount of determination could overcome the physical limitations he had discovered. Chun watched each departure with mixed emotions, sympathy for their struggle, but relief that her own boat crew remained intact. The afternoon brought surf torture, a BUD/S tradition that involved sitting in the frigid Pacific Ocean while instructors conducted lectures on topics ranging from naval history to the importance of teamwork under adversity. The cold was unlike anything Sarah had experienced, penetrating through every layer of clothing and gear until it felt like her bones were freezing from the inside out. The purpose of this evolution, Instructor Torres explained while the candidates sat linked arm in arm in waist-deep water, isn't to make you cold. The purpose is to teach you that you can function effectively even when you're uncomfortable. In real operations, comfort is a luxury you can't afford. The lecture continued for 2 hours while waves broke over their heads, and the California sun provided mockingly inadequate warmth. Sarah learned to embrace the cold rather than fight it, using breathing techniques to maintain core body temperature and mental exercises to stay focused despite the physical discomfort. But the real lesson of surf torture wasn't about cold tolerance. It was about mental resilience under conditions designed to break down psychological defenses. The instructors watched carefully for signs of hypothermia, but they were more interested in observing how candidates responded to prolonged discomfort that couldn't be overcome through strength or speed. Sarah discovered that Morrison was struggling more than he had revealed. His larger frame, which had been an advantage in some previous exercises, became a liability in cold water that leached heat faster than his body could generate it. Without speaking, she shifted position to provide additional warmth and stability, a gesture that he acknowledged with a brief nod that spoke volumes about their evolving partnership. As the sun began to set on the first day of Hell Week, the remaining 13 candidates faced the realization that they had completed only 1/5 of their ordeal. The physical challenges had been significant, but they paled in comparison to the mental warfare that would intensify as sleep deprivation accumulated and their bodies approached true exhaustion. The evening meal was consumed in silence. Each candidate focused on consuming maximum calories for sustained energy while fighting the nausea that often accompanied extreme fatigue. Sarah forced herself to eat mechanically, treating food as fuel rather than pleasure, knowing that her body would need every available resource for the challenges ahead. The night evolution began at 2,200 hours with a demolition exercise that combined technical skills with physical endurance under stress. Each boat crew was responsible for assembling and deploying simulated explosive charges on a target structure, requiring precision and coordination while fighting fatigue that made simple tasks exponentially more difficult. Sarah found herself designated as the primary demolition specialist for their crew, a role that required steady hands and clear thinking despite exhaustion that was beginning to affect everyone's performance. The technical aspects of the exercise were straightforward. She had mastered similar procedures during Marine Corps training, but executing them correctly while her body screened for rest-tested skills that went beyond simple knowledge. Timing is critical, she explained to her crew as they prepared their equipment in darkness illuminated only by red-filtered flashlights that preserved night vision. We have 17 minutes to place charges, clear the area, and initiate detonation. If we miss the window, we fail the evolution. The target structure was a mock-up of a coastal defense installation, complete with obstacles and defensive positions that forced the boat crews to approach from the most difficult angles. Sarah led her team through a route that balanced speed with stealth, using terrain features to mask their approach while maintaining the pace necessary to complete their mission within the allotted time. The charge placement required her to work in confined spaces while wearing full gear, connecting detonation devices with fingers that trembled from cold and fatigue. Each connection had to be perfect. A single error would result in mission failure and potential recycling for the entire crew. Charges set, she whispered into her radio after completing the final connection. Team moving to safe distance. The detonation that followed was both spectacular and satisfying, a controlled explosion that demonstrated their technical competence while providing a brief moment of triumph in what had become an extended exercise in suffering. But the satisfaction was short-lived. Another evolution was already beginning, and the night was far from over. By 0400 hours, Sarah had entered a state of functioning that she didn't recognize from any previous experience. Her body moved automatically through assigned tasks while her mind operated in a detached mode that processed information without emotional involvement. She was discovering the zone that separated special operations personnel from conventional forces, the ability to perform complex tasks effectively even when normal human limitations had been exceeded. Around her, other candidates were showing various stages of breakdown. Williams had developed a 1,000-yard stare that suggested he was approaching his limits, while Thompson seemed to be operating on pure willpower that could collapse at any moment. But Morrison, Kim, and Ramirez were showing the same adaptation that Sarah had achieved, their bodies pushed beyond normal parameters, but their minds still sharp and focused. As dawn approached on the second day of Hell Week, Saracen realized she was exactly where she belonged. The woman who had first arrived at BUD/S with something to prove had evolved into a warrior who was proving it through performance under the most extreme conditions the military could create. The brass bell remained silent, at least for her boat crew. But the real test was just beginning, and the next 4 days would determine whether her adaptation was genuine or merely temporary. Hell Week had a way of revealing truths about people that couldn't be discovered through any other means. The Pacific Ocean continued its eternal rhythm beyond the training compound, indifferent to human struggle, but somehow approving of another group of candidates who were discovering what they were truly capable of when everything else had been stripped away. Thursday of Hell Week arrived with a reputation that preceded it like a storm front. Among BUD/S instructors, Thursday was known as the day that separated those who thought they wanted to be SEALs from those who actually had what it took. By the time Saracen opened her eyes after 90 minutes of the deepest sleep she had experienced in 4 days, 7 more candidates had rung the bell, leaving only 6 survivors from the original 23 who had started the ordeal. Her boat crew had been consolidated with the remnants of 2 others, creating a single unit of 6 candidates who would face the final 36 hours together. Morrison remained their leader, his authority now unquestioned after 3 days of decisions that had kept everyone alive and functional. Kim had emerged as their navigation specialist, his methodical approach to problem-solving proving invaluable when fatigue made simple tasks nearly impossible. Ramirez had become their communications expert, maintaining radio discipline and tactical awareness when others struggled to remember basic procedures. Sarah had evolved into something she didn't fully recognize, the crew's troubleshooter, the person others looked to when standard solutions didn't work and improvisation became necessary. Her Marine Corps background and natural problem-solving abilities had combined with the extreme stress of Hell Week to create a warrior who thrived in situations where others merely survived. The morning began with surf passage, an evolution that required the boat crew to navigate their IBS through heavy surf during conditions that bordered on dangerous. The Pacific Ocean had been building strength throughout the week, and the waves breaking against Coronado Beach were now reaching 8 to 10 feet, with the kind of power that could easily injure or kill candidates who made mistakes. "Listen up," Instructor Torres announced as the consolidated boat crew prepared their equipment in the gray light of dawn. "Today's surf conditions are at the upper limit of what we consider acceptable for training. You will make 3 passages, out through the surf, around the offshore buoy, and back to beach. If you capsize, you will right your boat and continue. If someone goes overboard, the entire crew will recover them before proceeding. There are no individual heroes in this evolution." Sarah studied the waves with the analytical approach she had learned to apply to every challenge. The surf was indeed heavy, but it followed predictable patterns that could be navigated safely with proper timing and technique. The key would be maintaining crew coordination when the natural human response to danger was individual self-preservation. "Chun, you're our wave reader," Morrison decided after observing the surf for several minutes. "You call the timing for entry and exit. Everyone else follows your commands without question. The responsibility was both flattering and terrifying. In heavy surf, timing was everything. A few seconds too early or too late could mean the difference between successful passage and catastrophic capsizing. Sarah accepted the assignment with a nod that concealed the pressure she felt from 5 other people, depending entirely on her judgment. The entry required patience that felt impossible when adrenaline demanded immediate action. Sarah watched the wave sets, counting the intervals between larger waves and identifying the brief windows when passage might be possible. The ocean was never completely predictable, but patterns emerged for those who knew how to read them. "Next set," she called out, her voice cutting through the sound of breaking waves. "We go on my mark, 3, 2, 1, go." The crew launched their boat into the surf with the precision of a practiced drill team, 6 people moving as a single organism with perfect synchronization. The first wave hit them head-on, sending spray across the entire crew and testing their grip on equipment that had become slippery with seawater. Sarah called out steering corrections as they powered through the impact zone, her eyes constantly scanning ahead for the next wave that could capsize them if approached incorrectly. The boat crew responded to her commands with trust that had been earned through 4 days of shared suffering and mutual dependence. "Wave right. Pull left. Pull left," she shouted as a larger wave approached from an unexpected angle, threatening to catch them broadside and roll their boat completely over. The crew's response was immediate and coordinated, their paddle strokes synchronized despite exhaustion that made complex movements feel like conscious decisions rather than automatic responses. They cleared the impact zone and reached calmer water beyond the breakers, having successfully completed the most dangerous part of the evolution. The navigation to the offshore buoy tested different skills, endurance, and precise steering in open water where currents could carry them far off course if they lost focus for even brief periods. Sarah had shifted from wave reader to navigator, using landmarks on shore to maintain heading while the crew provided steady power through paddle strokes that had to be sustained for over a mile. Halfway to the buoy, Morrison began showing signs of serious fatigue that went beyond the general exhaustion everyone was experiencing. His paddle strokes became irregular, his responses to steering commands were delayed, and his normally steady leadership voice carried undertones of strain that suggested he was approaching his breaking point. "Morrison," Sarah called out during a brief pause to check their position, "switch with Ramirez. You take communication, let him take point." The suggestion violated normal boat crew protocol, but normal protocol assumed crew leaders who weren't operating at the edge of complete physical breakdown. Morrison looked at her for a moment, his pride warring with his practical understanding of their situation. "Good call," he said finally, accepting the tactical decision that put crew survival ahead of individual ego. "Ramirez, you have point." The leadership transition happened smoothly, a testament to the bonds that had formed between crew members who had learned to prioritize mission success over personal recognition. Ramirez moved to the front position with confidence, while Morrison settled into a support role that allowed him to recover while still contributing to crew performance. The return journey through the surf tested everything they had learned about working together under conditions that offered no margin for error. The waves had increased in size during their time at sea, and what had been challenging conditions during their outbound passage had become genuinely dangerous circumstances that required flawless execution. Sarah resumed her role as wave reader, but now she was operating with crew members who had reorganized their leadership structure under stress. The dynamics were different, but the trust remained absolute. When she called for steering corrections or changes in timing, every crew member responded immediately without question. "Big set coming," she announced as they approached the surf line. "We're going to ride the backside of the third wave. When I say paddle, everyone gives everything they have. This is our window." The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and they would be caught in the impact zone when the largest waves of the set arrived. Too late, and they would face an even bigger set that was already building behind the current waves. Paddle, paddle, paddle. The crew drove their IBS forward with synchronized strokes that generated more power than 6 exhausted people should have been able to produce. They surfed down the backside of a 10-foot wave, using its energy to carry them through water that would have been impossible to navigate through pure effort alone. They hit the beach hard but safely, their boat sliding up onto sand with enough momentum to clear the water completely. For a moment, they sat in silence, processing what they had just accomplished and the fact that all 6 crew members had survived an evolution that could easily have gone catastrophically wrong. "Outstanding," Torres announced from her position on the beach. That was textbook surf passage under difficult conditions. Chun, your wave reading was exceptional. Morrison, good decision on leadership transition. Ramirez, solid job taking point when the situation required it. But there was no time for celebration or recovery. Hell Week was designed as a continuous operation, and the next evolution was already beginning. This time, it would be the demolition course, a complex exercise that combined technical skills, physical endurance, and problem-solving ability under extreme time pressure. Each crew member had specific responsibilities within the demolition sequence, but success required perfect coordination between individual tasks that had to be completed in precise order. Sarah was assigned as the primary demolitionist, responsible for calculating charge placement and ensuring proper detonation timing. Kim handled navigation to target sites. Ramirez managed communications and security. Morrison, despite his earlier fatigue, took responsibility for equipment management and quality control. The target was a mock coastal defense installation located on the far side of Coronado Island, requiring an approach by water followed by overland movement to reach the objective. The entire operation had to be completed within a 4-hour window that included travel time, reconnaissance, charge placement, and extraction. Time is your enemy, Instructor Chief Warrant Officer James Sullivan explained during the brief operational planning session. Sullivan was a legend in the special operations community, with 3 decades of experience that included classified operations on every continent. When he spoke, even senior officers listened carefully. In real operations, Sullivan continued, you'll have enemies shooting at you, time constraints that can't be negotiated, and equipment that doesn't work exactly as planned. This exercise simulates those conditions without the bullets. Everything else, the pressure, the complexity, the consequences of failure, is exactly what you'll face in the field. Sarah studied the operational plan with the analytical approach she had learned to apply to every challenge. The demolition calculations were straightforward, but executing them correctly while managing multiple variables under time pressure would test skills that went far beyond technical knowledge. The approach to the target site required stealth and speed in equal measures. Moving 6 people with full equipment across water and land without detection by instructor role players who were positioned as enemy sentries. Sarah found herself naturally assuming the point position, using hand signals to guide her crew along routes that balanced concealment with forward progress. The target structure was more complex than the training mock-ups they had used during earlier exercises. Multiple charge points had to be coordinated for simultaneous detonation, requiring precise calculations and flawless execution of technical procedures that could cause real injury if performed incorrectly. Sarah worked methodically through the charge placement sequence, double-checking every connection and timing calculation while her crew provided security and maintained communication with their extraction support. The technical work required steady hands and clear thinking despite fatigue that made simple mathematics feel like advanced calculus. Charges placed and armed. She reported to Morrison after completing the final connections. Ready for extraction. But the extraction route they had planned during reconnaissance was no longer viable. Instructor role players had repositioned during their time at the target, blocking their primary escape path and forcing them to improvise an alternative approach under time pressure that was already critical. New route, Morrison decided after a quick assessment of their options. We go north along the shoreline, then inland through the marsh area. Longer distance, but better concealment. The improvised extraction tested their ability to adapt tactical plans under stress while maintaining operational security and time discipline. Sarah found herself again in the point position, navigating through terrain that offered concealment, but slowed their movement to what felt like a crawl. With 15 minutes remaining in their operational window, they reached the extraction point where their boat was hidden in marsh grass that provided perfect camouflage. The charges they had placed were set to detonate in precisely 12 minutes, and they needed to be clear of the area before that happened. Go, go, go. Morrison commanded as they launched their IBS from concealment and began paddling toward open water where they could observe their handiwork safely. The detonation, when it came, was both spectacular and satisfying. Multiple charges exploded in perfect sequence, creating the kind of coordinated destruction that demonstrated technical competence and tactical planning under extreme conditions. Sarah felt a surge of professional pride that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with the satisfaction that came from performing complex tasks correctly when failure wasn't an option. As they returned to base through water that reflected the lights of their successful demolition, Sarah realized she had discovered something about herself that she hadn't known existed. Under conditions of extreme stress and physical exhaustion, she had found reserves of competence and leadership that emerged only when everything else had been stripped away. The woman who had arrived at Bud/S to prove she belonged had evolved into a warrior who belonged so naturally that proof was no longer necessary. Hell Week had revealed truths about her capabilities that couldn't have been discovered through any other means. But, even more importantly, she had learned about the power of teams that functioned as single organisms under stress. The 6 people in her boat crew had become something greater than the sum of their individual capabilities, and that transformation was the real lesson of Hell Week. With less than 24 hours remaining in their ordeal, Sarah Chun looked ahead to the final challenges with confidence that came from having discovered exactly what she was capable of when everything was on the line. The brass bell had remained silent for her crew, and she intended to keep it that way. The final 18 hours of Hell Week began with an evolution that would become part of Bud/S legend. A 20-mile reconnaissance mission that required the surviving 6 candidates to operate as a single unit while conducting surveillance of multiple target sites across Coronado Island. What made this evolution different from previous challenges was the addition of live-fire exercises that introduced real danger to complement the simulated combat they had been experiencing all week. Sarah Chin stood with her consolidated boat crew in the gray light of Friday morning, their equipment arranged with the precision of people who had learned that small details could mean the difference between success and failure. 5 days of continuous operations had transformed them from individual candidates into a cohesive unit that communicated through glances and operated with the kind of synchronization that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Senior Chief Rodriguez addressed them with the solemnity that befitted what they were about to attempt. This final evolution will test everything you've learned during Hell Week and everything you think you know about operating under pressure. You will move through 6 reconnaissance sites, gather specific intelligence at each location, and report your findings using proper military communication protocols. He paused, letting the weight of what he was about to say settle over the candidates who had survived when 17 others had not. The difference between this evolution and everything you've done before is that you will be operating with live ammunition. The margin for error is 0. Any safety violation, any tactical mistake that would compromise your mission or endanger your team in real combat, will result in immediate dismissal from the program. The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the group that was different from anything they had experienced during the previous week. Training with blank ammunition and simulated explosives had been challenging, but the introduction of live rounds elevated everything to a level where mistakes could have consequences that lasted longer than a failed grade. Sarah checked her rifle for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, a habit that had become automatic during her Marine Corps deployments but felt especially important under current circumstances. The weapon was clean, properly maintained, and loaded with precisely the ammunition specified for their mission. More importantly, she knew exactly how it would perform under any conditions they might encounter. Chun, your designated marksman for this evolution, Rodriguez announced. Your targets will be precision shots at distances up to 400 meters. Miss tolerance is 0. Every shot must hit center mass or better. The assignment was both an honor and a burden. Designated marksman was a role reserved for candidates who had demonstrated exceptional shooting ability under stress, but it also meant that mission success could depend entirely on her individual performance when fatigue and sleep deprivation had degraded everyone's fine motor skills. Understood, Senior Chief, she replied, accepting the responsibility with the same confidence that had carried her through every previous challenge. Ready to execute. The first reconnaissance site was located on the northern tip of Coronado Island, requiring a 3-mile approach through terrain that offered minimal concealment and multiple opportunities for detection by instructor role players positioned as enemy sentries. The route planning session revealed just how much the candidates had learned about tactical movement during their week of intensive training. Morrison, still serving as crew leader despite the exhaustion that had nearly broken him during surf passage, studied the terrain map with the analytical approach of someone who understood that good planning prevented most tactical disasters. We move in 2-man teams with staggered intervals. Chun and Kim take point for navigation and overwatch. Ramirez and Thompson handle communications, and rear security. Williams, and I maintained central coordination. The plan reflected lessons learned through 5 days of operations that had tested every aspect of small unit tactics. Each team member had specific responsibilities, but cross-training ensured that anyone could assume additional duties if circumstances required adaptation. The movement to their first objective tested skills that went beyond physical endurance. Covering 3 miles while avoiding detection required patience, discipline, and the kind of tactical awareness that allowed them to identify threats before those threats identified them. Sarah found herself operating in a state of heightened alertness where every shadow could conceal an enemy position and every sound could signal discovery. Contact front, Kim whispered into his radio after they had covered approximately 2 miles without incident. 2 instructors in overwatch position, approximately 200 meters ahead. Sarah studied the enemy position through her rifle scope, identifying the instructors who were positioned to simulate a security checkpoint that blocked their planned approach route. The tactical problem was straightforward. Eliminate the threats without alerting other enemy forces in the area. Then, continue to their objective before the missing sentries were discovered. I have clear shots on both targets, she reported to Morrison after analyzing angles and distances that would allow her to engage both instructors in rapid sequence. Ready to engage on your command. Take the shots, Morrison replied after confirming that the rest of the team was positioned to provide security and continue the mission after the engagement. Sarah's first shot hit center mass on the left target at a distance of 247 meters, the rifle recoiling against her shoulder with familiar precision that felt natural despite 5 days of physical punishment that had affected everyone's shooting stability. Her second shot, fired 3 seconds later, struck the right target with equal accuracy, completing the engagement before either instructor could react to the incoming fire. Both targets immediately dropped prone and activated smoke grenades that signaled their elimination from the exercise, a procedure that simulated enemy casualties while ensuring instructor safety during live-fire training. The engagement had been executed flawlessly, but speed was now critical as other enemy forces would investigate the missing sentries within a matter of minutes. Move, 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 Morrison commanded, and the team advanced toward their objective with the urgency that real combat would have demanded. The reconnaissance site itself was a mock command post complete with communication equipment, tactical maps, and intelligence materials that had to be photographed and analyzed within a strict time limit. Each team member had specific intelligence gathering responsibilities, but success required coordination that allowed them to complete their mission before enemy reinforcements arrived. Sarah provided overwatch security while her teammates conducted their intelligence gathering, her rifle scope constantly scanning approaches that enemy forces might use to respond to the earlier engagement. Through her scope, she could see instructor role players moving through distant terrain with the tactical discipline of people who had conducted real reconnaissance missions in actual combat zones. Intelligence gathering complete, Kim reported after photographing key documents and recording information that would be transmitted to higher command upon their return. Ready for extraction. But extraction would require movement through territory that was now actively patrolled by enemy forces responding to the missing sentries. The tactical problem had evolved from stealth reconnaissance to combat movement, requiring skills that tested different aspects of their training. The route to their second objective required crossing open ground that offered minimal concealment, but represented the fastest approach to their next target. Sarah found herself again in the designated marksman role, this time providing covering fire for team movement through areas where detection was possible but unavoidable. Contact right, Ramirez called out as instructor role players appeared in positions that threatened to cut off their movement corridor. 3 targets, approximately 300 meters. Sarah engaged the threats with aimed fire that demonstrated precision shooting under combat stress, her training taking over in situations where conscious thought would have been too slow for tactical requirements. Each shot hit its intended target despite shooting positions that were far from ideal and wind conditions that required compensation calculations performed automatically through experience. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, but it established fire superiority that allowed her team to continue movement toward their objective without further interference from enemy forces in that sector. The instructor role players who had been eliminated by her accurate shooting provided immediate feedback that confirmed the tactical success of the engagement. Excellent shooting under combat stress, one instructor commented as they passed his position. That's exactly what we need to see in real operations. The compliment was professionally satisfying, but Sarah's attention was already focused on the next phase of their mission. 5 more reconnaissance sites remained, each with unique challenges that would test different aspects of their capabilities under increasingly difficult conditions. The second objective required water approach using their IBS to reach a coastal position where enemy communications equipment had to be located and analyzed. The boat insertion tested skills they had developed during earlier evolutions, but now the consequences of detection included live ammunition rather than just training penalties. As designated marksman, Sarah found herself responsible for neutralizing coastal sentries who were positioned to observe water approaches. The shooting was more challenging than previous engagements. Moving platform, longer distances, and targets who were actively scanning for threats rather than remaining stationary. Her first shot was fired from a boat that was rising and falling with ocean swells, requiring timing and marksmanship that went beyond anything she had practiced during conventional training. The bullet found its target despite conditions that would have challenged even experienced snipers, confirming abilities that surprised even her. By noon on Friday, they had successfully completed 4 of their 6 reconnaissance objectives, gathering intelligence that would have been valuable in real combat operations while conducting live-fire engagements that demonstrated tactical competence under genuine pressure. But the final 2 objectives would test everything they had learned about operating as a cohesive unit when individual capabilities had been pushed beyond normal human limits. The 5th objective was located in mountainous terrain that required technical climbing abilities combined with tactical movement skills. Sarah found herself leading the technical aspects of the climb while maintaining readiness to provide designated marksman support if they encountered enemy resistance during the ascent. The physical challenge of climbing with full equipment after 5 days of continuous operations tested strength and endurance that should have been completely exhausted days earlier. But Sarah discovered that her body was still responding to demands that her mind placed upon it, operating in a zone that she had never accessed during previous training or combat experience. Target acquired, she reported after reaching an overwatch position that provided clear observation of their objective area. Enemy patrol, for personnel, moving along the ridge line approximately 400 meters east. The engagement would require her most challenging shooting of the entire evolution, maximum effective range for her weapon system, shooting from an unstable position, with targets who were actively maneuvering rather than remaining stationary. Miss tolerance remained 0, but the tactical situation required immediate engagement to prevent enemy forces from discovering their reconnaissance activity. Sarah's breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that preceded precision shooting under combat conditions. Her rifle scope tracked the lead target through terrain that offered minimal background contrast, requiring visual skills that had been developed through years of training but refined through weeks of operating under extreme stress. The shot was fired during the natural pause between heartbeats, at the moment when her breathing was perfectly controlled and her body was completely still despite the challenging shooting position. The bullet traveled 412 meters through air that was affected by wind conditions she had calculated automatically through experience rather than conscious mathematics. The impact was center mass, exactly where she had aimed, demonstrating marksmanship that would have been exceptional under ideal conditions, but was extraordinary given the circumstances. Her follow-up shots neutralized the remaining patrol members with equal precision, completing an engagement that established fire superiority and allowed her team to complete their reconnaissance mission without further interference. The final objective required night operations that tested every skill they had developed during Hell Week under conditions that added darkness to exhaustion, equipment weight, and tactical complexity. Moving through unfamiliar terrain at night while conducting reconnaissance operations and remaining prepared for combat engagement represented the ultimate test of everything they had learned about functioning as a cohesive unit under extreme conditions. Sarah's role as designated marksman became even more challenging during darkness that limited her effective engagement range and required greater reliance on night vision equipment that was helpful but not perfect. The precision shooting that had characterized her daytime performance would be impossible under current conditions, requiring adaptation to different tactical approaches. Final objective in sight. Morrison reported as they approached their last reconnaissance target after 18 hours of continuous operations that had tested every aspect of their individual and collective capabilities. Intelligence gathering commences in 5 minutes. The last intelligence collection was completed without enemy contact, an anticlimactic ending to an evolution that had tested everything they thought they knew about operating under pressure. But as they prepared for extraction and returned to base, Sarah realized that the absence of dramatic conclusion was itself significant. Real special operations missions often ended quietly, with successful completion of objectives rather than spectacular combat engagement. The skills they had demonstrated during the past 18 hours, precision marksmanship, tactical movement, intelligence gathering, and team coordination under extreme stress, were exactly the capabilities that defined successful SEAL operations. As their boat approached Coronado Beach in the early morning hours of Saturday, Sarah Chun reflected on the transformation that had occurred during the 132 hours of Hell Week. She had entered the evolution as a candidate trying to prove she belonged among elite warriors. She was completing it as a warrior who had demonstrated belonging through performance under conditions that revealed truth about people that couldn't be discovered through any other means. The brass bell had remained silent for all 6 members of her boat crew, a testament to the bonds that had formed between people who had shared extreme challenges and emerged stronger than they had been individually. But, more importantly, Sarah had discovered reserves of capability that she hadn't known existed, operating in zones of performance that were accessible only when everything else had been stripped away. Senior Chief Rodriguez waited for them on the beach with an expression that revealed nothing about what he was thinking. Behind him, other instructors had gathered to observe the return of candidates who had survived when 23 others had not. "Secure your equipment and stand by for final evaluation," Rodriguez announced as the boat crew assembled in formation for the last time during Hell Week. The evaluation that followed would determine whether their survival of Hell Week was sufficient to continue in the program. But Sarah already knew the answer. She had discovered exactly what she was capable of when everything was on the line, and the knowledge would stay with her regardless of what happened next. As the sun rose over Coronado Beach, painting the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and blue, Sarah Chun stood among warriors who had earned the right to continue pursuing the trident through performance that spoke louder than any words could convey. The whispers that had followed her since arriving at BUD/S had been permanently silenced by demonstration of capabilities that couldn't be questioned or explained away. She belonged here not because of any special consideration, but because she had proven herself worthy through the same brutal testing that every SEAL candidate faced. Hell Week was over, but the real journey was just beginning.